I would like to welcome everyone to the 26th Annual Rappaport Memorial Lecture. This year we have the pleasure of learning with Tamar Weissman on the topic of, and it was on that night, how the Gideon story revolutionizes Pesach. For those who have not had the pleasure of learning with her, Tamar Weissman is a lecturer on Tanakh and Eretz Yisrael studies for Matan and Torah in Motion. She is currently one of 20 women Torah scholars on the Sefaria Torah Library Women's Authors Cohort, word by word. She has written 2 books, Tribal Lands, the 12 Tribes of Israel and their Ancestral Territories, and recently, The Bible's Wild Child, Midrashic Patterns in the Book of Shoftim. She's also a tour guide and lives in the Galil. The Gideon story in the Book of Judges, which unfolds over the night of Pesach, provides a unique lens with which to consider some important themes in the upcoming Pesach holiday. We will explore how an adolescent Israel, finding its way in the post-Joshua years, is transformed by the very special night set aside from the 6 days of creation, and we will reflect on how the lessons from that biblical Pesach might inspire this year's personal and national redemption. Sandra Rappaport, I'd like to give the floor to you for a few moments.
Oh, thank you. My husband, Sam, has a small introduction that he always likes to proceed the lectures with. So I turn the floor over to Sam.
Good afternoon. I'm Sam Rappaport. My wife, Sandra, and our family welcome you and thank you for participating in this annual event to honor the memory of our parents, David and Rose Rappaport, and Gabriel and Rebecca Sharon, and to hear Tamar Weissman deliver the 26th Annual Rappaport Family Lecture at Drisha. The lectures are Pesach themed because they were initially dedicated to the memory of my father, whose name was Pesach David ben Yaakov Yitzhak HaKohen, Zichrono Lebracha. My family and I are very grateful to Rabbi David Silber, the visionary dean and founder of Drisha, for providing a mechanism through Drisha that memorializes our parents and that celebrates their lifelong commitment to Jewish education. Thank you to Michael Bernstein and Kayla Blum at Drisha for helping make this lecture happen. We would also like to thank you, our audience, for supporting Drisha and for returning to this pre-Pesach lecture for 26 years. Our speaker, Tamar Weissman's commitment to teaching and writing about Tanakh and about the land of Israel, and her family's commitment to farming in the Galil, got me thinking about my parents' and grandparents' devotion to Israel and to Zionism. My grandparents, religious Jews living in Poland and Romania, left Europe soon after the First World War. For different reasons, they each settled in Cuba in the early 1920s, and this is where I was born and spent my childhood. Over the past 25 introductions to this marvelous lecture series, I've told a few stories of growing up in Havana with my parents and grandparents. Here is another true vignette from my memory bank. As a young child growing up in Havana, I spent Shabbat afternoons visiting with my grandparents. My maternal grandfather had 13 siblings. On leaving Warsaw, 2 of his brothers immigrated to Israel. So you can imagine, we got lots of mail. One Shabbat afternoon, I must have been 5 or 6 years old. As I sat with my grandfather, he went to get a letter that he had recently received from his brother in Israel. What affected my Zay the most about that letter was not its content so much. It was the Israeli postage stamp. He looked at that letter, and I still remember how he pointed to the gold-colored postage stamp, and with tears in his eyes, said to me in Yiddish, "Sammy, in my life, I never imagined that I would see a postage stamp with Hebrew writing. Can you imagine such a miracle?" Every year when introducing these memorial lectures at Drisha, Sandra and I vividly remember our parents and their collective love and support for Eretz Yisrael and for Jewish learning, especially at Pesach. Thank you all for joining us today, for it promises to be an exciting Pesach lecture. Tamar Weissman, this year's Rappaport Family Memorial Lecturer, is the author of 2 books, Tribal Lands, the 12 Tribes of Israel in their Ancestral Territories, and the Bible's Wild Child, Midrashic Patterns in the Book of Shoftim. Tamar is currently one of 20 women Torah scholars on the Sefaria Torah Library, Women's Authors cohort, word by word. Welcome, Tamar Weissman. The title of her talk is, "And It Was on That Night," the Gideon story revolutionizes Pesach.
Thank you so much for such a warm welcome and for the privilege to be able to deliver this year's Rappaport Family Memorial Shiur for Pesach. And thank you, Sandra, specifically for the invitation. I would like to focus today's Shiur on an event in the Bible that is a Pesach-oriented event. And it's an event that might not come across as obviously as a Pesach-oriented event, but I hope that in our survey of the source material, that it will become abundantly clear that this is a story that is set in Passover, in the Pesach context, and that it's a story that lends itself to certain insights into Pesach that I think are timeless. There are certain events over the course of the Bible that took place on Pesach, even though it might not be so obvious that they took place on Pesach. I'll stop myself for a second and say I'd like to hold all questions for the end when we'll have a time to have a question and answer period. And if you have any questions or comments, then please feel free to leave them in the chat. The story of Gideon, which is a story that takes place in the book of Judges in Sefer Shoftim, is a Pesach-oriented story. And there are other stories, as I mentioned, in the Bible that are also Pesach-oriented stories that aren't, at first glance, clearly taking place over Nisan, over the time period of the holiday of Pesach. But if we look a little bit deeply into the story, or even superficially into the language around the story, then we'll see a lot of textual pins that will place us in a Pesach context. And that, I think, will get us in our contemporary circumstance in the mood for Pesach and prepare ourselves for the upcoming holiday, the upcoming Moed, and give us some direction for thought as to how we might affect a personal and national redemption. So let's get started. Our introduction to Gideon is in the 6th chapter of Shoftim, and we're coming off the heels of the massive salvation in the era of Deborah and Barak, and we've just finished the reading of or reciting of the Song of Deborah, and the land was quiet for 40 years. And this was a period of relative calm until the Israelites backslided, as they tended to do in this, what I call this adolescent period of Israelite development after their leader Joshua had died, and they were bereft of leadership, and they have to kind of go it on their own and individuate and figure out how to mature as a nation and how to unite as disparate tribes into a nation. And it's a long journey. And so while we have various points of light and triumphs, as we just had in the victory of Deborah and Barak over the Canaanites and Sisera, we've once again descended into a dark period. You know, as someone who's deeply involved in raising adolescents right now, and I don't know if any of you can relate. I would assume many of you can. There's a lot of peaks and vales. There's a lot of triumphs, and then there's a lot of of turmoil. So we're in a tumultuous period right now, and the Israelites have been delivered into the hands of the Midianites. We're an eastern nation who invaded westward into the land of Israel, and basically in a rapacious takeover denuded the land of all of its resources. And so the Israelites cry out to God. The Israelites cried to God due to their oppression. And God sends a Navi. These are always the poignant moments when I read Tanakh. I'm like, well, couldn't we be privy to such insight of a prophet coming and speaking directly to us? But in this context, a prophet comes and delivers a message as to why the Israelites are being so oppressed. Vayomer lahem, Ko amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael, so says God. Anochi haleti etchem miMitzrayim. Don't you remember a mere few generations ago? I took you out, I lifted you up from the land of Egypt. And I freed you from the house of slavery. And I saved you from the hands of the Egyptians and from all of your oppressors. And I drove them out before you, and I gave you their land. So this is, the prophet is describing the post-Exodus period and the entrance into the land of Israel, when the Israelites were settling into their land and were victorious over their enemies, and God was with them. And I asked you not to betray me, not to worship the foreign gods, and yet you did not heed my voice. And so the context of the oppression, or of the message, the divine message that accompanies the Midianite oppression, is already a context of Passover. It's a context that we're going to see is redolent with language of redemption from Egypt, or of the time period of Egypt. So I'm already kind of in a mindset of the exodus from Egypt and the redemption from slavery. And it is in this context that we are introduced to our boy wonder, to Gideon. Vayavon malach Hashem, an angel of God appears. Vayeshev tachat ha'elah asher ba'ofra. And he sits himself down under a tree in Ofra. Now I'm going to wear my tour guide hat a little bit because I've been guiding the whole day. And I actually today guided in the footsteps of Gideon, just was a happy coincidence. And so I will say that this Ofra that we're discussing here is most likely an Ofra that's located in the Shomron near Shechem. It would have been in the territory of Menashe. Gideon is from the tribe of Menashe, and this is the context for the emergence of Gideon in the city of Ofra, the village of Ofra. Asher liyoash avi ha'ezri. But I put the cart before the horse because Gideon is not even mentioned yet. The introduction to Gideon is via his father, is via his Yoash from the house of Ezri, and Gideon bino, Gideon his son, chovet chitim bagat lahanis mipnei Midian. He's threshing his sheaves of wheat in the wine press so as to escape the roving eyes of the Midianites. Now, consider that we had already been told, even though I didn't bring you this verse in the source sheet, that Israelites were forced to dwell in caves and strongholds and be driven underground because of the Midianite oppression. So here we have Gideon, who again, I want to stress, is introduced to us by way of his father. His father will dominate the storyline, and that's a very important point to focus on over the course of this shiur. Gideon is processing his wheat, threshing his wheat in the wine press. So why would he be doing so? Clearly, he's trying to avoid the Midianites. So on the one hand, if he's processing his wheat in the wine press, it kind of throws off the whole the Midianite trail, because he's dealing with wheat in a wine press, which is confusing. I will pause. I'm going to hold one idea as to why he's processing his wheat in a wine press, but I will say that that the secondary idea, which I feel is not as strong as what I will get to soon, is that the wine press is a closed building. Generally, if you go to archaeological remains of wine presses, you'll see remains of walls around the press, as opposed to a goren, which is where you would traditionally thresh your wheat, a threshing floor, which is an open space. So that Gideon, to avoid the detection of the Midianites, is in a small contained space and an unorthodox space, an unconventional space for threshing wheat. Vayira elav malach Hashem, vayomer elav, and an angel of God appears to him and says to him, Hashem imcha gibor hachayil. God is with you, valiant warrior. Vayomer elav Gideon. And Gideon says to him, Be Adonai, come on. Who are you kidding? Please, please, my master. V'yesh Hashem imanu. Are you serious? Is God really with us? V'lama mitzatanu kazot. If so, why am I in this hellhole? Why are we suffering so terribly under this Midianite oppression? Va'yei kol niflootav asher sipru lanu avotenu. And where are all of the wonders that our fathers have been telling us about? Lemor, when they tell us, Halo mi Mitzrayim helanu Hashem, did not God bring us out of Egypt? Va'ata nitashanu Hashem. And now God has abandoned us. Vayitnenu b'kaf Midian. And he has given us over to the oppression of Midian. Vayifen elav Hashem. And God turns to him, Vayomer, and he says, Lech bekochacha zeh. Go with this strength, Gideon, Bo'shata et Israel mikaf Midian, and save Israel from the Midianite oppression. Halosh lachticha, have I not sent you? And so this is our introduction to the Gideon story. And it's the unusual nature of this introduction, where we are kind of thrown into a scene with Gideon and a malach who seems to be waiting for him to engage him in conversation, that prompts the midrash, prompts the rabbinic imagination to develop a story, a context that is not overtly evident in the text itself. And that is the context of Passover. So I did say that there are textual pins for this context. One was the prophet introducing Midianite oppression in the language of redemption from Egypt. But there are other textual pins as well that will anchor this concept of the Pesach context of Gideon. Let's look together at the Midrash. Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Shalom, Leo Pesach haya oto laila. It was the night of Passover on that very night. Sha'amar lo, where he said to him, where either Gideon said to the angel, or perhaps Yoash, Gideon's father, was speaking to him. This is a context of Leil Pesach, of the night of Passover, where the story of the redemption was delivered. And so Gideon is responding to his immediate context. This is what is preoccupying him, thoughts of the redemption from Egypt and his current circumstance. You speak, Father, of all of these wonders, but Tachlis, we're suffering right now. Where are all of the wonders of which you speak? All of these wondrous miracles are not part of my current circumstance. Because Gideon acted as a defender of Israel, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says,
said to him,
this one is a special one. Dinhu sha'agaleh ani bichvodi elav. I myself am going to appear to him. Shene'emar vayifen elav, as it says, if you recall in the verses that I quoted above, first an angel appears to him, and then God himself appears to him after Gideon gives his plaintive cry of pain at his current circumstance. Vayifen elav Hashem, God himself appears because he is so impressed, he is so taken with Gideon's defense of Israel. I myself appeared to him and say, go with this strength. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yesh b'cha koach lilmod sanegoria al Yisrael. You have this ability to be passionate or impassioned about the fate of Israel. B'zchutecha heim nigalim. Due to your passion, due to your care, due to your pain, due to the fact that you don't bury this, but it bothers you and it eats away at you, that is what is going to stand you as the savior of the Israelites. Shne'amar bo'shata et Israel. As it says, and you should save Israel. So as you see, the Midrash is starting to explicitly pin us into an Egypt context. I'll just expand on the textual pins. Not only do we have the prophet introducing Egypt, but as I had mentioned, Gideon is threshing his wheat in a wine press. Now, Israel is intensely seasonal, so we don't have wine into manufacturing or grape industry on our farm. We do olives, but olives and grapes go hand in hand. And the pressing of both olives and grapes for their oil and for their juice is always in November, December time. Sometimes you might jump the gun and do it in October, but never in the springtime. Now, if we're talking about Pesach as the context, and Pesach is the Chag Aviv, the spring holiday, then the wine press would be sitting empty, which would make it the perfect location for Gideon to be threshing his wheat if he wanted to evade the Midianites, their scrutinizing eyes. Additionally, so that's another kind of vague pin of this being a Pesach-centered story. Additionally, the Midianites are described as Ke'arbe Larov, as numerous as locusts, which is an unusual turn of phrase and reminds us of the plague of Arba. That's another potential pin. When Gideon further interacts with this angel that he met, who has just told him that he will be the savior of Israel, he prepares for him a gedi izim ve'afiyat kamach matzot. So this again, not extraordinarily compelling, that there is a lamb being prepared and matzot being prepared, but given the various different pins here, that also kind of helps. Additionally, there's a regular stress here on signs and omens, in that Gideon is regularly asking for signs. And this is something that is very Passover centered. And I will get to what I believe is the most compelling textual, contextual pin that will place the Gideon story in the Passover context. But I think if we look at all of that data and all of those ideas together, then Chazal are not coming up with this idea wholesale and from their imagination. There is a deep Mesorah, there's a deep tradition embedded within the text that the story is taking place over Pesach, and it's of extreme importance, not only to understand the story, but to deliver a timeless message, which I hope to explore now. This idea of the story happening on Pesach is something that is picked up by the traditional exegetes, by the Mefarshim. And so we'll see Rashi on Shoftim, on this verse, explain this in the same vein as the Midrash. Pesach haya, it was Pesach. Amar lo. But he adds a little bit of a storyline flavor to it. He says to the angel, he's like, yeah, you really, God is with me? Really? Emesh hikrani abba tahalel. Last night, we were all sitting over our kapas and our charoset and our karban pesach, and my father was reading out the Hallel. Ushmativ, and it's not lost on me. I heard him say, B'tzeit Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. I heard him say this great paean of praise that when the Jews were redeemed, when they left Egypt, but now you are abandoning us. In tzadikim hayu avotenu ya'aseh lanu b'zchutam. If our ancestors were righteous, then act in their merit. V'im risha'im hayu, if they were evildoers, k'shem sha'aseh lahem neflo tzav chinam, ken ya'aseh lanu. Just as you redeem them, redeem us, even if we are unworthy. Va'ayei kom niflotav. Where are all of his wonders? So Rashi here is picking up on this midrashic strain, which is so sensitive to the nuances of the text. This is also going to be picked up by Radak. I'm not going to belabor the point. I just love, I brought Radak here because I love how Radak also weaves this into a story and says that Yoash was Yoash, the father of Gideon, was threshing his wheat, and Gideon says, "No, father, you are old. It's too difficult for you. You go inside the house and I'll take over the task. Ani yechovet. In case the Midyanim come, you won't be able to escape. I'm still young and sure-footed. I'll be able to escape." And so the Malach says, because of your kibud av, because of your honoring your father and your fealty to your father, your fealty to tradition, your willingness to sit there at the Seder and hear this story that rings so hollow and so false to your current circumstance, then that will stand you as your zchut that my children, God is saying, will be redeemed through you. And so the Radak kind of, not only will he go on and say what Rashi said, which was that, what the Midrash says, which was, through you defending Israel, your passion is what stands you in good stead. It is that, but it is also your loyalty to your father and your kibud av and your connection to earlier generations that is your merit that has made you into the Savior. And Rashi reiterates this as well. It's Radak and Rashi, but Radak collapses it into one comment. Rashi breaks it up, and Rashi also focuses on this this element of Gideon that is not only a sanegor, a defender of Israel, but is also one who is deeply loyal to his father. And so these are the two concepts which I'd like to develop a little bit further. The idea of Gideon as a defender of Israel, and the idea of Gideon and his fraught relationship, let's say, with tradition and with transmission. Before I go too deeply into those two concepts, let me just point out here that there is one more textual pin that will connect the Gideon story with the Exodus. And that is, again, not extraordinarily compellingly strong, but all of them together definitely form an emergent pattern, all of these pins that I've been mentioning. And this takes us back to Moshe's annunciation, where he is called upon by God to be the savior, just as this is Gideon's annunciation of sorts. And when Moshe responds to God, and he is very self-deferential, and he says, "Mi anochi ke'elech el Paro." Who am I that I should go to Paro and that and that I will free the Israelites from Egypt? Well, Gideon's language is very reminiscent of that, where he says, "Bi Adoni, bama oshia et Yisrael." Please, my master, how can I possibly save Israel? I am the weakest within Menashe. My family is the weakest clan within Menashe, and I'm the youngest of my father's house. And so the same kinds of sense of self-deference is found with Moshe in this verse and is paralleled with Gideon. And then Moshe, getting back to Moshe's context, God responds to him, "Don't worry, Moshe, ki ehyeh imach. I shall be with you," which is found also in Gideon's, the reassurance God gives to Gideon, "Vayomer elav Hashem ki ehyeh imach," that I shall indeed be with you. And then going back to Moshe, ping-ponging back and forth, where God says to Moshe, "This will be your sign. This is the sign that I have sent you to redeem the nation from Egypt." And Gideon here says, "Imna matzati chen beinecha v'asita liot." I need reassurance. I need further reassurance, God. Please send me a sign that you are speaking with me. So this comparison between Moshe and Gideon, I think, is quite strong, and essentially, I feel, rounds off the case of bringing the Egyptian, or the redemption from Egypt, that context, into our story here in Shoftim Perek Vav. Now, going back to this idea of Gideon as the defender of Israel, and Gideon as Yoash Avi Ha'ezri's son, first and foremost. Gideon is someone who is extraordinarily loyal to his father and greatly fears his father. And that is why the Midrash picked up on this strain that Yoash wasn't present when the angel appeared to Gideon. Gideon was alone threshing the wheat because Gideon had sent his father to rest at home while Gideon did the work. That idea is manifest later on in the narrative, which is why the Midrash can pin it back to that earlier context. When we have in later on in that verse, in the chapter, God instructs Gideon to destroy his father's altar to the Baal. His father was an idolater, and to offer up various sacrifices to God. I'd like to look at this context, Vayhi balayla hahu, and it was on that night, a refrain that we're going to hear over and over again, and I hope also is very reminiscent to you of the Pesach context of Gideon, and it was on that night. Vayomer lo Hashem, God says to him, Kach et par hashor asher la'avicha. Take this bull that belongs to your father. Your father has a specific bull. Upar hasheni, and yet there was another bull as well that you should take, Gideon, Sheba Shanim. That's 7 years old. Now, the first bull belongs to Yoash, who lived in Ophrah, just another citizen, or even perhaps the leader of Ophrah. But the second bull that's 7 years old, I just wanted to remind you that the Midianites had been enslaving or oppressing Israel for 7 years. And so that is what's going to lead Rashi to say that this 7-year bull had been fattened for 7 years to be worshipped as Avodah Zarah. And that's brought down this idea of a bull being set aside for Avodah Zarah is brought down in the Gemara as well, in this context of Yoash and his son Gideon. And the concept is that the bull is set aside, and whoever redeems Israel from the Midianites will be the recipient of this sacrifice. So it was a bull set aside for the end of the oppression. So when God instructs Gideon to take his father's bull and to take this second bull that has been set aside for 7 years, it is a signal of the end of the Midianite oppression. You should break down the Mizbeach of the Baal that belongs to your father, and the Baal's consort, the Asherah tree, that too you should cut down. And Gideon does indeed do this. He takes 10 men with him, and he goes as God had demanded, and it was because he feared his father's house. The stress is always his father, his father, his father. And remind you that Gideon is introduced to us by way of his father. Because of his fear of his father and the people of the city, he does all of this at night. So what I'd like to point out here is that there seems to be a kind of dissonance that Gideon has to suffer with, because if you recall, the previous night, Gideon was sitting down at the Seder with his father, which seems like a very traditionally Jewish, or let's say even at that in those days, Israelite idea, that this is a night where the father is supposed to transmit to the son the core concepts of enslavement in Egypt and then redemption from Egypt, and the bonds of father and son are strengthened through the telling of the redemption story. What had happened to our ancestors will happen in our day as well. And that is meant to be the V'higada levincha. You should tell your son on that night, the night of Passover, what has happened to our forefathers, in the anticipation of that being our redemption as well. And yet this Yoash Avi Ha'ezri, the father of Gideon, also has an altar to the Baal. It is a dissonance that that is quite jarring. Can you observe Pesach one day and serve Baal the next without some kind of a cognitive dissonance? It's like his childhood has been some kind of a confusing syncretistic mix. His father maintaining an altar to the Baal, and yet also maintaining loyalty to the transmission of the Masorah, of our traditions, from generation to generation. So I think that that as much as that Jewish parents, let's say, like Yoash, we're supposed to be reassuring our children that God will save us from Midian. And I don't know what kinds of a show Yoash had put on the night before. Remember what God had done for us then. Surely he will do the same for us now. But sometimes things go wrong in transmission, especially during confusing and complicated times. There can be dissonance and doubt. And the parent himself or herself can sometimes present that dissonance and doubt. And I think that that's just part of the human condition. That's almost part of the transmission condition, that we ourselves as parents, eminently human with our own conflicts and our own conflicting loyalties sometimes, doing our best to syncretize the disparate traditions and values that we have, but sometimes that comes across as a confusing jumble of loyalties and identities to our children. Even if the transmission was clear, and if the parent was entirely certain in God's salvation and believed that it would have been at hand, the child himself may be full of doubt. So if you don't mind, I'll just read, I wrote up a couple of lines, and I'll just read a couple of lines because I feel that they best encapsulate this point of the breakdown in transmission, the sincere and genuine attempt that I feel I read of Yoash to transmit his values of tradition and of the exodus from Egypt to his son, while somewhat falling short in that he's also an idolater, so he has these competing drives within him. But what beats at the heart of Gideon's success is his refusal to accept what he doesn't fully believe in, and his unrelenting push for more and more affirmation and connection with God. He doesn't just say, this is all too confusing for me, and my identity is so fraught and so caught up in so many competing values, but he pushes for clarity and he fights back against that angel. And he doesn't just say, okay, I'm at your behest, I'll do whatever you want to do. He says, no, where is God? God has abandoned us. Passover is a time of questions and answers, of fathers passing down truths and sometimes doubts to their children, and of generations together grappling with dissonance between promises of redemption and realities that fall far short. So Gideon asked for and received this personal redemption on Passover. He received the signs that he asked for. He asked over and over again for signs. And Israel will, in short order, be saved from the Midianites on that same Passover. But what Gideon teaches us is to never stop pleading with God to speak to us, to show us a sign, to send an angel, to send a prophet, to demand redemption for our broken world. And that is what makes him, I feel, such a current hero, a relevant hero for our troubled times. So there can be dissonance and doubt. And I think that that's what this context of shoving the Pesach context into the Gideon story provides for us, which is the reality of dissonance and doubt, and how we grapple with that, and how we push through, and how we don't give up, and how we must always be a sanegor, a defender, a impassioned and engaged with the Borei Olam, to insist on a better, on geula, on redemption in our days. So that is the first, or the ideas that I think the Pesach context of Gideon in this first chapter deliver to us. But I'd like to look at the second chapter of the Gideon story, Perek Zayin, where we are hit over the head with another element of Pesach, which I feel is so central to to not only the Gideon story, but to our experience in a couple of weeks at our Leil HaSeder. You'll notice throughout the Gideon story, and I don't bring the entire text here because it's chapters long and it's very intricate and involved, but trust me on this, because I've done my homework thoroughly, that the Gideon story is saturated with night. Everything takes place at night. So first, we've gone over some of these night stories. There's the night of Leil Seder, where Yoash told his son, Gideon, all about the Pesach story. And then that night, Vayhi Balayla Hahu, which is, we just read together, when God tells Gideon to go sacrifice these animals that had belonged to your father and belonged to idolatry, we have to make a shift in the Israelite mindset and now worship God and not worship idols. Following that is the night where Gideon does what he commanded. And then when Gideon, what God had commanded, and then Gideon asked for sign after sign. You can see it here. I bring you the details. All of the signs take place at night that he had asked for. Now, after Gideon is reassured and he gathers together his army, then he is still very troubled by this idea that he might be the savior. It's still, he might be reassured, but he is still grappling with that sense of certainty. So he asked God for yet another sign. And it was on that night that he asked for a sign. Vayhi b'chatzi halayla. I bring here the context in Exodus about how the entire Exodus also takes place during nighttime, also anchoring us back to the Exodus story. Paro arising in the middle of the night, calling for Moshe and Aaron in the middle of the night. An idea that, of course, finds expression in our Haggadah. Here I bring you one of my favorite Haggadot. It's the Ashkenazi Haggadah from the 15th century, an illuminated manuscript. And here we're at Nirtza, the very end of the Haggadah, where we have all of those wonderful songs. And this is the introduction to that piyut, that liturgical poem by Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, all of the things that happen at night. And you can see here's like Sleepy Joe, whatever, I like this, Rumpelstiltskin. Well, who's the one who's like, wears the sleep cap and he's like
Rip
the Sandman.
Van Winkle.
Rip
I think
Van
it's-
Winkle, that's who I meant. Rip Van Winkle, yes. So he's sleeping. So he's kind of spreading his fairy dust, and so I find that very humorous. But this is a night that stands outside of just the Passover context. If I was working hard throughout the course of this shiur to place Gideon in the Pesach context, then this is a night which our tradition delivers to us, a night that was set aside at the very outset of creation. Leil Shimurim, the night of watching, which we associate with the story of Passover, the Exodus from Egypt. Lail HaMishumar, the night that has been set aside and continuously watched. Uva Misheshet Yemei Bereshit. It is a night set aside and held in abeyance, as it were, from the 6 days of creation. In other words, it is a time that we're approaching as we anticipate Or Liyom Tadvav in a couple of weeks' time. Our Leil Seder is an appointment with time. It is a moed that we revisit year in and year out, but there have been certain circumstances, certain events in our history, including with Gideon, where the koach hayom, the specific aura of the day, the power of the time is best expressed. That would be in Egypt, and again here in the Gideon story. So I direct you to the 7th chapter of Shoftim to see how Pesach, as it were, Passover, reaches its greatest expression in the Gideon story. And here I'm in the 7th chapter. Vayavo Gideon, v'hinei ish misaper l're'ehu chalom. Gideon is uncertain. He needs another sign. So God tells him go to the edge of the Midianite camp, and you will overhear a sentry reporting, and tell me what you hear, is what God says. And Gideon steals over to the Midianite camp, and the sentry is reporting to his friend that he has dreamt a dream. Hine chalom chalamti. Once again, it's nighttime. It's dream time. V'hine tzliel lechem sa'orim mithapech b'machane Midyan, vayavo at ha'ohel, vayakehu vayipol vayihapcheu lemala v'nafal ha'ohel. As you can see here, this loaf of barley bread was whirling through the Midianite camp and totally collapsed our entire encampment. Vayan re'ehu vayomer ein zot bilti ish cherev Gideon ben Yoash ish Israel. This must mean that Gideon ben Yoash, the Israelite, is going to defeat us. Natan Elokim biyado, God has given us over into his hand, and our Midian and its whole camp will be destroyed by them. Now, this idea of Gideon going and overhearing this dream is something that struck me as very reminiscent of a much earlier dream of Gideon's ancestor. If Gideon is from Shevet Menashe, then his ancestor is Yosef. Menashe was one of the sons of Yosef, and Yosef we know of as a dreamer, and so Yosef reports his dream, and then he reports his dream again. Shimona hachalom azer asher chalamti, vaychalom od chalom acher v'yisaper oto le'achav. He delivers these dreams to his brothers, and then the Midrash links these two stories together so powerfully and says the following: Vayachalom od, and Yosef continues to dream. Vayisaper le'achav, and he tells his brothers. Amar lehem, he says, my dreams don't end with me. My dreams echo far into the future with my descendants. Atid ben latzeit mimeni, a son will come forth from me, a descendant, sheyoshia etchem, v'yifram isonechem, that will save you and deliver you from your enemies. Al yedei sipor chalom, through the telling of a dream. Zehaya Gideon. This was none other than his descendant Gideon, shene'emar vayavo Gideon v'nei ish misaper l're'ehu. As this context delivers to us that Gideon overheard this dream. So Gideon's own personal redemption is something that he senses his destiny is being realized at this very moment. This night of Pesach is a time of deep personal redemption. He grasps this latent power that had been his and Israel's all along and is now his personally to achieve. So on the one hand, I really see this Pesach context as being a time for personal redemption, for personal responsiveness. Nighttime is a time not just of questioning, not just of darkness where things are uncertain and unclear and we're grasping for clarity, but we all recognize the possibilities of nighttime as being a time of great epiphany, of great breakthroughs, of deep conversations. We're able to have conversations, intergenerational conversations, conversations with ourselves that we can have at night, which aren't of the same power or the same impact as daytime conversations. And so it is the personal redemption that Gideon is experiencing that I find so powerful here. But it is not just personal redemption that he hears when he overhears the telling of this dream at that night, the night of Pesach. He also hears the story of national redemption. Listen to this beautiful midrash as we near the end of this shiur in Vayikra Rabbah. Amar Rav Afan Rabbi Necham Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba b'shem Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Simon Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Shimon ben Lakishi. There was a machloket between these two great Amoraim. Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Lo'olam al tehei mitzvat ha'omer kala be'enecha. Never belittle the mitzvah of Omer. And time doesn't allow us to go into Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, which is outrageous and marvelous about how the Omer basically was what caused Israel, the Israelites, to merit the entirety of to merit the promised land back in the days of Abraham. Unfortunately, we'll have to go into that another time. But I'd like to go into this other opinion. Amar Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Simon, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Hi she'amda lehem bimei Gideon. This is what stood for them in the days of Gideon. Because what was it that the Midianite sentry saw? He saw this barley loaf that was flattening the camp of Midian. So essentially, the barley loaf, standing for or representing the Omer sacrifice, which is a very simple sacrifice. It's a sacrifice that represents the cessation of our dependence on God and the beginning of our independence. It is the perfect metaphor for the book of Shoftim, for the book of the adolescents of Israel, where we're beginning our first terrifying independent steps in the land of Israel without the man. As soon as the man ceased, that is when we brought the Karban Omer, the Omer sacrifice, and that is when we began our independence to eat from the bounty of the land. So Gideon stands here at the edge of the camp, not just realizing his own personal destiny as the culmination of Yosef's dreams, but he's reminded of the Omer sacrifice that had just now been brought. We are in Pesach. It had just been bought in the Mishkan in Shiloh, and the Omer that recognizes not only our independence, but recognizes that our independence is dependent on our belief in God, on our relationship with God, that we only succeed as farmers in Israel if we nurture and build a deep relationship with the divine. It is a land that demands the dynamic of relationship. And that dynamic of relationship is symbolized by the Omer. And so what Gideon is seeing in this barley loaf that's flattening the camp, what he's reading into this, say our sages, is that God has not abandoned us. He cherishes our independence. He cherishes the crude and simple Omer offering that was just brought because it symbolizes that we depend on him alone to provide. So he yearns for our faithfulness, demands that we engage with him alone, and that we each be a Yerubal. Yerubal was another name of Gideon. He who rejects the false gods that stand between us and him. And if we, with that acknowledgement, when Gideon finally understands the symbolism that had been gifted to him, then he's fully reassured that we will merit victory over those that claim the land is their own. So I'll end with just a couple of lines that I wrote, and then I'll give a summary of the shiur and then open the floor to questions. Israel's adolescence is marked by many opportunities for them to learn to strike the right balance between independence and submission. Can they achieve self-determination while still appreciating that they are reliant on God? That night, God provides a crutch where he says, though you must fight, I shall be with you. But what Gideon, I think that the Pesach context of the Gideon story provides for us is a number of points that I think we can use in reflection of the upcoming, in anticipation of the upcoming Chag. First and foremost is to work the best that we can, and I'm speaking for myself now as a parent, and thinking through the issues of transmission, to be true to myself and the dissonance that all of us are roiled with, right? The competing messages that we hear, while trying our very best, which is all that we can be expected to do, to transmit our values on this special night, and create as little dissonance for our children while still giving voice to the realities of the dissonance between the salvation from Egypt and our current circumstance. to take advantage of all that the night has to offer. This is a story, the Gideon story, again, saturated in nighttime, and realize that all of the mitzvot of Pesach are night-bound mitzvot. It's a unique time to question and to receive answers, to dream and also to realize dreams, and to tap into this Leil Mishumar Mesheshet Meha Bereshit, this night that has been set aside from the 6 days of creation specifically for this holy transmission intergenerationally, and to continue on our traditions to the best of our ability. And then finally, to act in that model of Gideon, to be a sanegor, to be a defender, not only of ourselves and where we stand in Mul HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but to be a defender of Am Yisrael, to stand up and say, where are you, God? You who have demanded of us to tell this story year in, year out. Here I stand now in Tafshin Pei Hey, and Ayin Niflotecha. Where are your wonders? Now, I think we can all agree there have been some tremendous wonders, many tremendous wonders that we have been privileged to witness. Kishivchal Yad Yamsuf. We have seen wonders in our days. But with your permission, I'll just end with a tefillah that I had written at the behest of some of my friends who put together a book called Aznashir. It's a book that was published in Israel from Israel, compilation of Israeli women who are writing different prayers. And I chose back then, this was over this past summer, to write a prayer called Tfilat HaSanegor, the prayer of the defense attorney. And I wrote it in Hebrew, and I'm not going to read it for you here in its entirety in Hebrew, but I'll just read a couple of selections in English, and then I'll open the floor to questions. If you do want to read it for yourself, I do suggest you read it in Hebrew. But the translation, where I tried to the best of my limited ability to channel Gideon, and which I will hope to do in a couple of weeks' time when we're called upon once again to be a sanegor in front of God at Leil HaSeder, where we say to God, you are our Lord, and fortunate are we, and how great is our portion. Ashreinu matov chakenu, umayafa yerushatenu. But where is the ni'imut of our goralenu? Where is the pleasantness of our lot? You sit concealed with a nearly complete mystery as our land burns from Shtula to Nachal Oz, and we have no other land. Do not hide your face from the blood of your beloved, from the destruction of your vineyards, from the suffering of your precious ones, for we are your nation and you are king. And I'll leave this for you just to go on, but I'll just read this last bit that I had written. Misha Amar lebnei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, pakod yifkod Elokim etchem, hu yamer liYisraelim, ra'o ra'iti et oni ami asher bebeiri u'bnei am, ve'et b'harchava be'eretz zavat chalav u'dvash. Send us an angel or a saraf. Shlach lanu malach o saraf o b'chvodecha u'v'atzmecha hoshiat amecha. But if you don't want to use an interlocutor, God yourself save us. To rejoicing. Harem karen la'amecha ki kulanu tzadikim nitzer mata'echa ma'aseh yadecha lehitpaer. So I wish you all, on that note, great defense of Am Yisrael in this upcoming Chag, and Ruach HaKodesh, and a special divine gift to transmit in purity and in holiness our Mesorah to the upcoming generations. Okay, and now I'll take any questions that were left on the chat, and if anyone has any other questions, then I'm happy to take them in person.
I'd like to interject, if I could, Tamar, just to say how moving and resonant this was. The image of Gideon the night before all of this is happening, actually challenging his father in a kind of manishtana. En chadash tachat hashamesh. I mean, this is happening today and how many thousands of years ago. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
It was a pleasure. Yes, and I'll just take some questions now, and if anyone needs to sign off, then, of course. Ruth, hi. Gideon is threshing wheat. Isn't that Shavuot time and not Pesach time? While that's true, that the Zman Katsir is traditionally Shavuot time, all I can say to that is that this is a midrashic device that is not explicit in the text to contextualize the Gideon story in Kufat Pesach. So it's not an airtight case, though I can tell you from a number of years of hands-on experience that the processing of wheat is not always around June. Sometimes it comes a little bit earlier, sometimes it comes a little bit later. I say this with some authority because we processed 19 tons of wheat this year. And so in Israel, in the Galil, and so it didn't exactly happen around Zman HaKatsir, but you're right, that definitely stands as a counter to the idea of this being Pesach time, which is barley harvest. Although one can say perhaps he's threshing a few sheaves of wheat that came early so that he'd be able to make fresh matzah. There are those who make matzah throughout the Chag of Pesach. Is Gideon doing malacha on the first day of Pesach? Susan, that's a great question. Tzorech ochel nefesh, perhaps, or I would just say that the Midrash, in placing this story roughly in Pesach, isn't identifying, well, last night, yes, the device was last night we had the Seder, and so today I am preoccupied with thoughts of the dissonance of being told about the redemption and living through my current hell, and the additional dissonance of my father telling me about the redemption and my father being an idolater. So, how do I square all of this away? I would say that the midrash has to be taken with a certain suspended belief and appreciated for its meta message and not the specifics of it. Foreshadows David, youngest son of Yishai, being chosen through Shmuel, Saul.
You never said it.
If you could explain that a little bit more, I'd appreciate that. I'm not sure I see the connection, but again, it's been a very long day. I should say, and I didn't say this, I only said this to Sandra in the beginning, but for those who are still with me, I had the distinct pleasure today of being in Mayan Charod, in the place where Gideon actually whittled down his army and set out to the Midianite camp to overhear the sentries speak. I like that. So I'm just saying that was it's a long day, but a glorious day. Thank you, Debbie. Reminds me of Vayhi Balaylahu, the Megillah from Purim, which also is a Pesach context. Also, yes, I hope you're still with me, Debbie, so that I can give a shout out to that. Yes.
I am.
Okay, good. So the Midrash will also place Purim in the Pesach context and have to work very hard because the lots were cast on Yudalad Nisan. And Vayavor Mordechai transgressed the first day of Pesach through fasting at Esther's behest. There's all kinds of midrashim about Purim taking place on Pesach. There's also midrashim about the story of Sancherib Melech Ashur and his siege on Jerusalem in the days of Chizkiyahu HaMelech in the 8th century, happening Vayhi Balayla Hahu on Pesach. So the Vayhi Balayla Hahu, Vayhi B'chatzi Halayla, Laila context will signal to Chazal to be on alert for Pesach. So this night that stands from the Sheshit Yemei HaBreshit crops up in different biblical stories, and who knows, maybe it'll crop up in Leil Shimurim Tafshin Pehei. We'll have to wait and see. With a name like Yoash, it's despairing and makes for a dubious role model. That's a very good point. Never thought about that. Just thought about Yoash as like a classic biblical name, but the Yeush of a father who is is juggling numerous different value systems and the difficulty in transmitting that. I like that very much. Thank you. Barley is the Omer offering this on the second day of Pesach. Thank you, Debbie, for that. Yes, and as Ruth said, this is where Chazal are going to identify the Omer with the barley loaf and another link to Pesach. Why is Gideon so afraid of his father? Thank you, Rose, for this question. We see that Avram made such serious changes in a new path, and his father accompanied him to a certain point by foot. So why is Gideon afraid of his father? I think, and I'm only going to conjecture here, Rose, you make a beautiful point, which I didn't explain in this shiur because there just was not enough time. That is that if you want to compare Shoftim Perek Vav, which is the story of the iconoclasm of Gideon, to the iconoclasm that the Midrash creates in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer and elsewhere of Avram Avinu destroying his father's idols, it makes for a very interesting contrast, especially how the fathers react. If you recall, Terach gives Avraham over to the ruler, aka Nimrod, to be burned, right? Whereas Yoash will vehemently defend his son. I see a strong love relationship between father and son here, which plays itself out in the pain and the anguish of a son hearing his father's message ring hollow. You know, sometimes your teenagers look at you and they're like, you know, are you walk the walk, but are you talking the talk, right? Like they sniff out hypocrisy very, very quickly. And so, I think that is speaking to why Gideon was so afraid. He had a strong love bond with his father.
And in terms
Yes,
in terms of Abraham, he did have his father accompany him, so he sort of ichnia to the situation. I think till Aram Naharaim. I don't know where they went to exactly. Yasher koach, toda rabba.
yes, b'simcha, b'simcha. Azi, I thought there was a general principle in Judaism. God never wishes yasher koach to anyone who is angry at him, but maybe projecting our anger at ourselves to God is different. Usually when a prophet expresses anger at God, he is fired. Like you put that. Yeah, he's either, he's it's like, what kind of a prophet is that? I think that that to be a sanegor, and I'll give a I think that Gideon charges us all to the best of our careful ability to be a sanegor, and I thank you for pointing this out. When I wrote a couple of tefillot for this book, and when I wrote the tefillah, especially the sanegor, I was exceedingly careful to find the words that could stand the test of time and maintain an integrity where my anger wouldn't dominate, but the defense of Israel would dominate, where the love of God is present, but equally present is the love of Israel. And so when you're so passionate about your people, and when you're so passionate about your land, my second prayer was about Admat Eretz Yisrael. When you're so passionate about defense of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, then I think it's not anger necessarily towards God. It's an opening. It's an asking, where are you? It's plaintive, not in the IFF end, but IVE end of the word, the plaintive cry of someone who really searches for an answer. It's not a rhetorical question. It's come and do for me what you did for Egypt. Come and do for us now what you did for Egypt. It's a deep, deep yearning, much more than it is an anger. I hope that comes across in my poor attempt at its tefillah. At least I hope the anger doesn't come across too strongly. And I don't know that I don't hear Gideon's anger necessarily. I hear his strong defense of Am Yisrael. Okay, so I sent my prayer, Sandra. What became of the Midianites? They were I didn't, for those who are still with me, and I know I'm going on a little bit long here, I'll just tell you what happened to them. They were chased way off to the east, and their generals were killed. What eventually happened to them is they faded out into all of the nomadic tribes that we associate with Arabia. but their generals, specifically Orev and Ze'ev, were killed. Now, Orev and Ze'ev are names that speak to predators, right? Orev is a raven and Ze'ev is a wolf. And I will just take you for 1 second back to this last source that I brought. They brought Orev and Ze'ev's. Can you see my source? Yeah? Are you with me? Anyone who's still with me?
Mhm,
No,
mhm.
you're
Okay.
still on the screen.
We don't see you.
Okay. Oh,
Tell
you
us-
don't see me. Okay.
Doesn't-
I'm
tell us
getting my screen back.
It's okay. We've got the source.
Sorry.
Anyway, just tell us
Oh,
what
you
this.
have this. Okay. So then the last source, it's the very last source where Rashi is commenting on how they brought Orev and Ze'ev, the heads of Orev and Ze'ev, the generals of Midian, back over across from the eastern side of the Jordan to the west. And Rashi here, inimitably, in his exceedingly clever way, just so cleverly inserts baboker, kishavar Gideon et hayarden lerdov achar zebach v'tzalmuna, in the morning. And it is that word that spells the end of Gideon's night and the break of his dawn, where he has realized his potential, his personal redemption. He has become that which Joseph had dreamed up for him. And he also has realized the redemption of the Jewish people, of the
Nice.
Israelites at that time, Baboker. So as our Leil Shimurim yields to Alot HaShachar, right, as the sages say, we can stay up and talk about the Exodus up to dawn. There are many themes of the Exodus to discuss, and I think especially in our day, as we play the Sanegor, as we play the defense attorney, and ask God for our redemption on a personal level and also on a national level. So
Thank you so
thank you all
much.
very much.
Yes, Shayach, beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, everyone,
you.
for coming for today's shir. Thank you to the Rappaports for your support in making this happen. And I hope to see you all at future learning events with Drisha. Coming up, starting out, our signups are open for our Sfira Zman, in which will start after Pesach. And you're welcome to check out the classes at drisha.org/classes. Take care, everyone, and be well.